Welcome, everyone, to the Weinberg Group webinar entitled The 505 B2 Nda Pathway, an Innovative FDA Strategy That Everyone Should Understand. All participant lines will be in listen-only mode throughout the call. However, if you would like to submit a question or comment to the presenters, click the button marked Ask a Question on your event window and submit your question. All questions will be answered via email within a week of the presentation. To start, I would like to turn the conference over to Mr. Antos. Mr. Antos, please go ahead.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar. I'm Jeff Antos from the Weinberg Group, and I'll be moderating today's session entitled The 505 B2 Nda Pathway, an Innovative FDA Strategy That Everyone Should Understand. The Weinberg Group is a regulatory and scientific consulting firm serving pharma, biotech, and device clients. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C. Our speaker, Joel Falk, Weinberg Group Executive Vice President, leads our product regulation and compliance practice and has spent his entire career in the pharma business, holding executive management positions at a number of major pharmas, including Lederle, Knoll, Besselar, Rhone-Poulenc, Sanofi, and In Vivo. Joel's comments today are based on many years of global drug development experience. I'll now turn the presentation over to Joel.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Today we'd like to discuss a regulatory strategy that many of you may know, but it's a strategy that could be very useful for companies to efficiently develop new products for which the FDA already has a good basis of knowledge, and that strategy is the 505(b)(2). Sorry. I think we're getting there. Okay. So today, the overview of today's talk will include, obviously, again, a discussion of the 505(b)(2) NDA pathway to approval. And again, this pathway has the potential to limit not only the need for you to develop very specific information about your product, but it really goes to the heart of a lot of the more expensive parts of development, things like toxicology studies and some of the more extensive human safety and efficacy studies. The benefits for the 505(b)(2) then become extremely obvious in terms of lowering the cost of development and really, truly, if you believe that time is money, shortens the development time. We can also see here, since the 505(b)(2) has become available to companies, that both large and small pharmaceutical companies have been taking advantage. So what we'll talk about are issues concerning what you will need to do in order to succeed at this strategy, and probably more important, how can you avoid failing at it? So in today's discussion, we'll take a look at some of the definitions of the different options for making these regulatory submissions for drug approval in the United States, and specifically how the 505(b)(2) fits into these options. We'll look a little bit at the process for going about getting almost permission to do the 505(b)(2) and how you would put all of that together. We'll talk a little bit about some of the regulatory and legal issues. Everyone is always concerned about exclusivity for your product, so we'll touch on that. There are certain pieces of required information that will certainly be important as you approach the 505(b)(2). We'll look a little bit in not too much detail, but in a very general sense, what the comparative costs would be for you to develop a 505(b)(2) as opposed to some of the other options. And we'll also take a look at some of the elements that would lead to a successful submission. So the three options that we're really talking about here are the 505(b)(1), the 505(b)(2), and the 505(j), which we'll talk a little bit more in more detail in the following slides. But again, all of these are very specific to U.S. regulation and are covered in the Section 505 of the FDCA Act. So first, let's take a look at the full NDA. This has been always known as the full NDA. This is the 505B1 and is primarily used for products that contain new chemical entities. In the 505B1, you would be required to report to the FDA a very complete package of information concerning this product, which would include but may not be limited to issues relating to non-clinical pharmacology and toxicology, all of the clinical pharmacology of this product, all of the clinical studies that are available that would support the safety and effectiveness of your product, and of course you would be responsible for demonstrating that you have consistency in the chemistry, manufacturing, and control aspects of your products. And most generally, all of these studies would be the responsibility of the innovator or the applicant of this product. The 505B2, as opposed to the 505B1, which again, as we just said, is a very complete reporting and new studies, is intended to encourage, similar to the 505J or the generic application, not to have to do wasteful or unnecessary studies to demonstrate what the agency may already know about your drug. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the coming slides. In most cases, the 505B2, unlike the generic application, will not yield an AB rating in the United States once it's approved. So what are the basics of the 505B2? One thing that you need to keep in mind is that in spite of the fact that this is regarded really as a full NDA and has the same, almost the same weight as a full NDA, there are some benefits to doing this. The first thing is that your 505B2, the product that you're developing, should be the same as an active product. That would be the basis for your comparison. The reporting requirements, you can now rely on what's been previously reported on the safety and efficacy, and these would be studies that would not necessarily have been conducted by you as the applicant, and that you're going to be relying on what the agency, what the FDA already understands about their from prior conclusions that they've made on this particular active product based on other NDAs. So if another NDA had been approved, then clearly they believe that the non-clinical and the clinical aspects of those NDAs were supportive of safety and efficacy. The other thing that you need to keep in mind is that these would be products for which you as the applicant do not have the right of reference. The other thing that you would need to consider for the 505B2 is that although you can rely on previously reported safety and efficacy studies, your product is going to be, by definition, somewhat different from the innovator product, and that there will be new studies that will be required to support the difference between your product and the innovator product. So the products that would be allowed under the 505B2, we can start talking about some of those now. So these would be changes to previously approved drugs, and the types of changes that you might see would be changes either in dose regimen. So this would be a product that is already been approved, but you want to change the way that the dosage is administered. It could be a slight difference in the API. Either the salt or the ester or some other aspect of the API is slightly changed. You can still rely on some of the information about that active ingredient. It could, again, also be the same active ingredient, but now you have a new indication. It could be an RX to an OTC switch. which would require a little bit more work, but again, it's the same active ingredient and would be allowed under the 505(b)(2). It would also be allowable to have a 505(b)(2) if the product that you have is not equivalent, is bio-inequivalent, but it's not inferior in terms of bioavailability compared to the reference listed drug. A 505(b)(2) would also be allowed if the formulation changes that you have ascribed to your product are outside of the limits that are set for generics. And we'll talk a little bit about those allowances for the 505J later. And it's also, again, cannot be used for products that would be eligible for an ANDA or a generic application. So those are some of the products that would be allowed. Some of the products that are not allowed, I think, conversely, again, so any product that would be covered by an ANDA or a 505J would not be allowed under the 505(b)(2). It would not be allowed if the only difference that you had between your product and the reference listed product is that the extent to which the active ingredient that is absorbed is less than the reference drug, or if the only difference is that the rate that the active ingredient is absorbed is unintentionally less than the reference listed drug, that would not necessarily be allowed under the 505(b)(2). So some examples of 505(b)(2) NDAs where you're changing the route of administration. In many cases, a lot of the products that we've seen have been IV products that have been switched to being administered by other parenteral routes. There have been some changes, as I had mentioned earlier, about changes in the active ingredient, whether it's in the salt or the racemate or an enantiomer is being developed. A new molecular entity actually could be considered a 505(b)(2). An example of that would be where the product that you have is a prodrug of an already approved product, or it's an active metabolite of an approved product. That could be considered in this area. It could be a new combination product that you're developing where each of the individual components of your product had been previously approved, but individually. You can rely on a lot of that information so that you would not have to redo that for each of those independent components. And again, formulation changes where in your formulation you may have an excipient that was not allowed under the 505J or the generic product. Additional examples of the NDA, of the 505(b)(2) NDA, would be changes in dosage form where you're going perhaps from an oral form to a transdermal, or you could be going from an immediate release product to an extended release product. We see that quite a bit. Even if you're going from a lotion to a foam, the formulation here is different, the form is different, and you may be expecting very different results and may be expecting to have a very different label, so that too would be an example of a 505(b)(2). Changes in dosage strength of an API would be also subject to a 505(b)(2). However, if your dosage strength is higher than what was approved prior, then you're going to be responsible to demonstrate that the higher dose would also be safe. The dosage regimen, in many cases, products that are given more than once daily try to reduce the number of times that it would be given during the day, so changes in dosage regimen would also be an example of a 505(b)(2) NDA. Let's talk a little bit now about the ANDA and how this fits into all of it. Remember, we've talked now about the full NDA, the 505(b)(1), the 505(b)(2), and now the generic, which is probably the most abbreviated of the applications. This also is considered a type of a new drug application where the generic drug is based on the demonstration of comparability to an innovator drug product. These applications, as I said, are very abbreviated because they generally don't require any additional preclinical or clinical information to establish safety and effectiveness. As a matter of fact, it should be a rare occurrence that that's required. But instead, companies that are going for generic applications need to demonstrate bioequivalence to the reference listed drug and show that the product would perform then in the same manner and is comparable to the innovator in terms of the active ingredient, obviously, the dosage form, the strength, the route of administration, very specifically needs to be exactly the same in labeling, quality, performance characteristics, and so on. It needs to be exactly the same as the innovator product. So an abbreviated application or the 505J can be used if you have an identical active ingredient, the form's the same, the strength's the same, the route of administration's the same, and all of your conditions of use are exactly the same. The products also can be cleared, can be sent in if there is a petition to the FDA and the FDA finds that it is suitable for a generic application. So now let's take a look and see how these compare and what kind of differences you might expect from the abbreviated types of submissions, and that would be the ANDA and the 505B2. So the first would be in terms of exclusivity. If you have an ANDA product, a generic product, if you are the first to file with a certification, a paragraph 4 certification, you would be eligible to get 180 days or 6 months of exclusivity on that product before another generic can come out on the market. The 505B2 NDA, if the filing that you submit for your 505B2 has clinical information, you can then expect, following approval, 3 years exclusivity and, of course, whatever patent protection you have on your specific product. In terms of chemistry and manufacturing and control information, in terms of the analytical portion of the CMC, it is exactly the same for both of the pathways, so there's no real difference. In terms of stability, however, there are some differences between the requirements for an ANDA and the 505B2. For the ANDA, you will be required to submit at least 3 months of real-time stability for at least one batch and 3 months of accelerated stability for the ANDA. For the 505B2, you would be required to demonstrate 12 months of real-time stability on 3 batches and 6 months of accelerated. In terms of safety, again, it's not required for the ANDA. All you require here is bioequivalence. And for the 505B2, you would usually be required to demonstrate that your new form of the API, of the exact API, is still safe. Moving to efficacy information, again, since it's only bioequivalence for the ANDA, it's not required. For the 505B2, it is required, and specifically for the indication, you have a new form, you have something different, you're going to have to demonstrate that your product will work appropriately for the indications that you desire. In terms of patent certification, it is going to be required for both the ANDA and for the 505(b)(2) NDA to assert that you're not infringing on a patent. The PK data for the ANDA, this really is the crux of the submission. So at a minimum, for the ANDA, you would be required to do a single-dose fasted bioequivalent study. And in some cases, depending on the product and the circumstances, you may be required to do a single-dose fed study, but it's not required under certain circumstances. For the 505(b)(2) NDA, at a minimum, again, you would be required to do a single-dose fasted bioequivalence. In many cases, most cases, you would also be required to do a single-dose food effect study and also a multiple-dose study, steady-state study, especially when you're looking at modified release products. In terms of labeling, and again, I keep stressing this, the ANDA really needs to conform to the reference-listed drug. And if there are specific indications in the reference-listed drug, you will not be allowed to do those unless you specifically prove that. For the 505(b)(2), it may be similar to the reference-listed drug, but you're obviously going to be allowed to include some of the more unique information that you're going to generate for this specific submission. And also, it's very possible that some of the indications that you will go for may differ from the reference-listed drug. I'd like to take a few minutes now just to take a look at a real general overall comparison of the three different pathways as we've described them today. So in terms of providing information on the formulation, for all three of the different submission packages, obviously you're going to have to provide information. Preclinical toxicology is not necessary under the ANDA or the generic route. It may be necessary depending upon your dose strength under the 505(b)(2 and is usually and probably always necessary under the 505(b)(1) application. Manufacturing stability controls information is required for all three of the different pathways as we previously described. A big difference between the generic pathway and the NDA route is the ability to actually meet with the agency. Under the ANDA route, these are normally not possible. Under the NDA route, either 505(b)(2 or B1, they are available and in many cases highly advisable. Pharmacokinetics, again, as we've described before, would necessarily be required for all three of the routes. Clinical trials, again, depending upon how much information is available on the reference-listed drug and how it relates to the 505(b)(2, your new product under 505(b)(2, you don't always need it, but usually you'll need studies under 505(b)(2 to demonstrate the safety and effectiveness of either a new indication or a new route or something. Under the ANDA, you don't necessarily require needing to do a clinical trial, but in some instances, depending on the product, you may be required to show a clinical endpoint in your generic trial, but it's not always so. And in very rare occasions for the 505(b)(2, a clinical trial may not be needed. And I've got that in here because somebody told me that, but I don't know of a 505(b)(1 that hasn't had a clinical trial. Again, another opportunity to meet with the agency, which is usually extremely valuable. and there are a number of other meetings that are possible, but I've listed one here that I think is very important, which is the Pre Nda Meeting. There is no NDA for the ANDA, so that's out, but this is an opportunity for both the 505(b)(2) and the 505(b)(1) applicants to meet with the agency to share data and to understand the expectations of the agency as you head into your NDA submission. Obviously, submissions are required for all three of the pathways. A big difference right now is the difference in users' fees. When a clinical study is required, the users' fees are imposed. So for the ANDA, there is no users' fee, and for the 505(b)(2) and the 505(b)(1), there are users' fees that are available or that are necessary. And as of today, for 2011, the users' fees that are due at the time of the NDA submission are about they're close to $1.5 million, but there are exceptions to paying for that that relate to the size of your company, the number of products, or if you've had a product approved by the FDA, and so on. So there may be ways to avoid that, but right now the user's fee is $1.5 million. The exclusivity that we've talked about previously, you may get some exclusivity if you're the first one, first generic out there, which again was 6 months. And usually you can get exclusivity for the B1 and for the B2. In terms of cost, which most companies are normally interested in, and what the savings might actually look like, for the ANDA route, and I've only included for the ANDA and for the 505(b)(2) for these abbreviated types of products, the bioequivalent studies, and these are very, very ballpark kinds of numbers here. There could be many exceptions to these, but in general, BE studies would take about 4 to 6 months from the time you start to the time you report them, and may cost anywhere between $50,000 and $750,000. And again, that really relates to the number of subjects that you would need to study, the complexity of the study itself, and perhaps even the cost of analysis. Submission for an ANDA usually takes probably about 1 to 2 months, but the time to approval is actually fairly prolonged in that it could be a year and a half or even more. And I think one of the ways that the NDA has reduced that time is through the user's fee. So again, without the user's fee, there's no real time limit that's been imposed on the agency to provide an action on your ANDA application. For the 505(b)(2), again, if there's a clinical trial or even more that are needed, each one of those, depending again on the therapeutic area and the type of indication and what it is that you need to prove, the estimated duration for these trials normally is between 1 and 2 years to start and finish, and could range between $2 and $10 or more million. And again, it's difficult to estimate the cost on these because you need to include not only patient costs to the investigator, but also costs related to contract research organizations to help with monitoring, data management costs, statistical analysis, and so on. So these are, again, very round numbers. Bioequivalent studies, again, would normally be the same as we had seen before for the generics. So each of the BE studies could take 4 to 6 months at a cost of between $50,000 and $750,000. Again, the submission, if planned correctly, could be 1 to 2 months after the last study is in. However, with the fact that these need to be filed electronically, that normally can be extended a little bit. The time to approval, and actually it's the time to an action by the FDA, would be 10 months. So what's the process? The major elements that you need to consider as you head into the 505(b)(2) process, and these are elements that may seem fairly simple, but I think these are the kinds of things that you need to keep in mind as you approach a 505(b)(2). There are a number of meetings and a number of materials that need to be prepared that will help with the cooperation with the FDA, and I think that they're extremely important. And there are 3 major meetings that I would like to focus on. The first is the Pre-Ind Meeting, and at this meeting you will be discussing with the agency the information that you know about your active product, the products that, or the program that you intend to provide for the IND studies and for approval, the pathway you wish to choose, and essentially a negotiation with the agency to apply as much knowledge as they have on the active API as they possibly can, in the hopes that you can limit the amount of work that you'll be required to do. The second meeting is the end of phase 2 meeting, and again, with a 505(b)(2), you may actually be jumping into a phase 3 trial. But again, at the end of phase 2, this is extremely important to discuss where you are in terms of your current knowledge and where you want to go with phase 3, and get buy-in from the agency that your phase 3 program is acceptable to them, and if the data are positive from the phase 3 studies, that this would be a reviewable product. And then obviously the Pre-Nda or the Pre-BLA meeting is extremely important, because it's at that point that you will discuss the information you have, get assurances from the agency that you are ready to file, and find out any particulars from the agency as to what their expectations are for the NDA submission. And then obviously the submissions are the IND, which allow you to start clinical trials in the States, and the NDA, which is the file that they will review for approval. And then there are a number of FDA interactions that can occur during the course of your development. So let's talk a little bit about the meetings and the materials. So again, the Pre-IND meeting is termed as a Type B meeting, and that means that it is specified by the agency as an approved type of meeting. This will be a grantable meeting. There will be a briefing package that will be essential. It's important to pay attention to that briefing package, because that will be the only document that the agency will review in order to answer the questions that you have about your development as you move forward. So it needs to be concise, it needs to be very accurate, and it needs to be very complete. This is your opportunity, again, to present all of your scientific rationale for the development strategy that you are presenting. It's an opportunity for you to gain some buy-in, some cooperation from the FDA on the strategy that you've chosen in the 505(b)(2), and you will be asking questions specifically from the agency. This is not an open-ended type of meeting, an open discussion. You need to ask specific questions from the agency about your program, and hopefully you'll get, in many cases, companies only want positive answers. I've told a number of our clients that what you really want are unambiguous answers, so that you have no mystery going into your development program. Again, the end of phase 2 meeting will also require a package. This too is a Type B meeting. You will be presenting the phase 2 information, hopefully obtaining agreement from the agency regarding your plans for phase 3. And also you can begin or maybe continue discussion on approval needs relating to CMC and other issues, things like pediatric requirements. The Pre-Nda meeting, as we had mentioned before, you'll be presenting your phase 3 data. You'll review any of the CMC issues and also discuss any of the content and special needs that the FDA would be requiring from you for the NDA. So how do you prepare for all of this? So the success of the meeting is really directly related to the quality of the information that you will be preparing, and it's very important for you to be prepared. One of the things that we do after we've asked all of the questions that we think we would like to have answers for is we try to anticipate what the FDA responses might be before we even receive any of the official FDA responses. If an FDA response is clear, then we feel that there's no real need to pursue the discussion if we feel that we really understand their position. If it is unclear, if the FDA response is unclear, we need to be prepared with the right kinds of conversations with the agency so that we can obtain from them an unambiguous answer. If there are any questions after these meetings, you're really not better off than you were before you had the meeting. You still have the question. So when you have the meeting, there are a few things that you should probably prepare yourselves for. The first is you should really understand the attendees and know all of the attendees at the meeting. Each of the people that you bring, each of your representatives, should have a purpose at this meeting, and you should understand exactly what their positions are and know exactly what they're going to say before they go into that meeting. You should also try to understand the positions and the attitudes of the FDA before the meeting, and this will help you, obviously, in anticipating some of their responses and some of their reactions to the materials that you'll be presenting. For your group, for the representatives that will go into a meeting with you, you need to assign every individual to have a task. Some of the people that you will, or at least one of them, will have the responsibility for leading the discussion with the agency. There are others that will be tasked with answering certain and specific questions. Somebody should be keeping time, making sure that you don't run out of time before you have an opportunity to get all of the specific answers to questions that you need. And somebody should also be tasked with providing minutes for that meeting. You should have a strategy for the meeting. There will be a time prior to the meeting, and it normally will happen, well, it is supposed to happen within 1 week of the meeting, that you will receive responses from the FDA to your specific questions. However, sometimes those aren't available until 24 hours prior to, and there have been instances when we have received FDA responses as late as an hour before the meeting. But if you have an opportunity to take a look at their responses, the meeting strategy should include a discussion of some of the issues and how you are going to present how you're going to manage that meeting. So you want to discuss the questions with the agency in a logical order. What's most important and what will take the most time, because we want to make sure that we get the most important questions answered. There should be no surprises at that meeting. No one should be asking questions that were not posed prior to the meeting or for which we don't believe that the agency would actually respond to new questions. There should be no new data that's proposed at this meeting. The agency will not respond at the meeting to anything that they have not yet seen in advance of the meeting. After the meeting, it's important to have a debriefing session. You'll find that every member of your group in the meeting will probably focus on some different aspect of the meeting, and everybody should participate then in the drafting of the meeting. Again, since they each have a different focus, we want to make sure that all of these issues are captured in the minutes. And there probably will be a number of follow-up issues after the meeting. You should really try to act on those follow-up issues as soon as possible. The meeting minutes that you as a company create should be sent to the FDA project manager as soon as possible. We try to get it to the project manager within 48 hours, if that's possible. Sometimes it's not, but that's what we strive to do. You should understand, however, that your company minutes is an encapsulation of what you heard, but none of that is really official until the FDA has provided you with their minutes. And in some cases, it's a little more than what their initial responses are, but if there are changes that occur at the meeting, the FDA will issue minutes to you in writing, and it should be within 30 days of the meeting. In some cases, however, you need to prod them to get this, but their minutes are really official, and you should be able to get them as soon as possible. So I'd like to summarize now, if I may. I think the 505(b)(2) pathway really is potentially low risk and has the advantages that I think many companies look for, in that it may actually shorten the time to an approval and the time of development, again, without having to repeat a lot of the costly studies in toxicology and also some of the clinical studies. It also reduces the cost, and perhaps there's significance in exclusivity that you can get, which is extremely better than what you can get from the generic. The process by being allowed to have these meetings with FDA gets you early feedback. I think it's really important to understand what the agency is expecting and be able to discuss this with the agency. We've had clients that have decided not to gain that feedback, but it really is very risky because you could be doing something that the agency ultimately would not accept, and therefore you'd be wasting your time. So I think it's really important to get into a discussion with the FDA as early as possible, and that the FDA meetings and these interactions are really, I think, the keys to a successful program. I think companies understand their products, understand what it takes to develop these things appropriately, but it's only through these interactions that you understand what the expectations are from the agency. So with that, I would like to turn this back to Jeff.
Thanks, Joel. Your presentation has sparked quite a number of questions, and I'm just going to start with a couple of terminology questions that are fairly straightforward. The first one is, and I'll just lump a couple of them together, what is the terminology, what is an AB rating, and also what's a BLA?
Well, I mean, that's simple. I think for most generic products, if you're able to show that you are bioequivalent, then pharmacists in this country, once a prescription is given to a pharmacist, they can automatically switch from the innovator drug to the generic. So that would be an AB rating. The BLA simply is a full application, but it is for a biological product.
Great, thanks. Another question. For an ANDA, is it possible to have FDA meetings during review? You
know, it's possible, but there are very few that have been granted. So I think it's much less possible with a generic application with an ANDA.
Okay. How do biosimilar products relate to the 505(b)(2)?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think a lot of that now is being discussed. I don't think that the FDA really has finalized their thinking on this. I think they're still struggling with it, but the biologics so far have been handled as NDAs, and the biosimilar regulations are still in formulation, really.
Okay, thank you. Another question. How does the change in labeling affect the regulatory submission pathway? For example, the change in applicator for dermal products, if there's an applicator change where there's only a change in the directions for use but no other change, would this be a 505(b)(2) or an ANDA?
Well, under the provisions of an ANDA, it's expected that everything in the innovator's label is going to be exactly the same. And if it's not, then the correct type of application would then be the 505(b)(2). So it would be the sponsor's responsibility, really, to demonstrate that the change, in this case, the applicator, wouldn't alter the safety and the effectiveness of the drug, of the product.
Okay, thanks. One thing I've heard about B2 NDAs is that the various divisions can vary widely in how they approach what arguably might be similar issues, for example, preclinical demands, where the indication ought not impact to any significant degree what is required of the applicant. Do you agree? If so, is this improving at all?
Yeah, I think whoever asked that, I think, you're correct. I think the divisions have looked at 505(b)(2) applications in somewhat of an inconsistent manner. Actually, even within divisions for different kinds of products and for different reviewers, there's been some inconsistency in the way that the applications have been viewed. But if you can cite decisions that were made by different divisions, because I think they probably do have some merit. However, you're not likely to succeed in these specific cases unless you can really demonstrate and convince the division that you're in of the similarities in the situation. So it's not a given in all of the divisions, and it really is going to depend on the strength of your argument and more specifically your data.
Okay, thanks. Are you always granted a meeting if you want one?
Yeah, I think the agency usually will grant you a meeting, providing that they really believe that there's a sufficient objective and enough information to have a reasonable discussion and an outcome. There are instances where the FDA suggests a teleconference, but that's still a meeting instead of face-to-face, or they could reject the meeting if they don't believe there's a need or a possible meaningful discussion. I think it's important to understand, especially for companies that are new to this process, that the agency is not going to have a meeting to help you with the development of your product if you haven't yet thought about it. So it's important that they understand that you have a plan and that they will be responding to your plan. If you go in with a question, I have this product, and could you help me with what I need to do, the most they'll do is just refer you to a bunch of guidances. So it really is important that you show the agency that you understand why you're there.
Okay. Thanks. And a follow-up question on meetings. Can we record the meeting?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's any regulation that would prohibit you from doing that. But the divisions, at least the ones that I've worked with, really frown on this. But if you want to do it, you must ask first.
Okay. A question here regarding reference products. When can a 505(b)(2) applicant access data from a reference product if there's no right of reference? Does the reference product need to be off patent?
That's a good question. I think by nature of the type of submission, by nature of the 505(b)(2) application, means that you don't have access to the innovator's data, and that what you're really doing is relying on the FDA's finding of safety and efficacy for the reference product. So you don't really have access to anybody's data.
Yeah.
What you do have access to is the fact that that data had actually supported an approval, which meant that the agency was satisfied with safety and efficacy for the reference-listed drug. It's not necessary for the innovator product to be off patent, but you would have to include some certification, I think I had mentioned this before, that addressing the patent in your submission.
Okay, thanks. And a technical question here on PK studies.
Yeah.
In terms of PK studies, what specifically should we look for in our clinical testing versus standard drug? Would AUC and Cmax be sufficient?
Yeah, it really depends. But demonstrating bioequivalence through standard AUC and Cmax is really optimal, but this would not preclude the FDA from asking for additional data if they felt that it was warranted.
Okay, good. And here's one I haven't seen before. How about 2 pre-NDA meetings? Can we get a second one if we need it?
Yeah, this is, actually a number of people have asked that question in the past. It's not probable that you would get a second pre-NDA meeting. There's another mechanism for getting another meeting if you don't get all of the information that you need in the first pre-NDA meeting, but it would be very specific to an issue. The agency allows what they call a Type C meeting for these additional issues. The only problem that you have is that the timing for these types of meetings could be much longer and take longer to obtain. Therefore, it would take longer to get your answers than you might expect for a pre-NDA meeting, which is a Type B meeting. A Type A meeting, which we really didn't discuss before, is also possible, but that means that you would need to convince the agency that your progress is really stymied, that you're at a critical point and you can't move forward without an answer from the agency. But again, if you're at the pre-NDA stage, that might be difficult to prove.
Okay. And finally, I've got one more meeting question. This about pre-IND meetings. At which stage do you recommend we ask for a pre-IND meeting? How early in development should it be? If you just executed a single dose clinical study, can FDA give clever answers to the clinical plan based on the company data for a single day only?
Yeah. The timing, for the pre-IND meeting can be tricky in some cases. The first thing that you need to consider is that the IND is really only needed when you plan to perform a clinical trial in the United States. So if this is the only objective that you have, you may not even need the meeting, and your IND filing hopefully could be strong enough to support the trial that you want to conduct. However, if your objective is to not only perform a clinical trial, but you also want to get some feedback from the agency, in this case, perhaps to discuss your plans to submit a 505(b)(2) and what the parameters would be and what the expectations would be around the 505(b)(2) submission, then it would be highly advisable to wait until you've developed enough information so that you could have that very good discussion concerning the strategy in much more detail.
Okay, great. I'm going to end the questioning there. We had lots of questions, and we'll email the answers to the ones that we've covered and the remaining questions to participants within the next week. I encourage you to take a moment to fill out the survey. You should see a click on your screen right now for that. Joel, thanks for your great presentation and for the questions. I thought the questions were great too, and we had lots of them. And also my sincere thanks to the participants who tuned in. Good day. Have a great day. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the presentation. Before you log off, we would very much appreciate if you could please take a moment to complete a short evaluation form. Thank you for your participation.